Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, the results of this month's European Union elections have sparked a reckoning in France.
I've never seen French society as polarized as it is now.
Will Emmanuel Macron's election gamble pay off? I'm Natasha del Toro, and this is The Take.
So my name's Tristan Redman. I'm speaking to you from Paris, and I am the senior producer in the Paris bureau for Al Jazeera English, and I cover French news mostly.
Wonderful. And we're going to talk about Paris today, but before that, let's start with the European Union elections that happened earlier this month.
The European Parliament is the EU's only governing body directly chosen by voters. This past weekend, those voters pulled that body more to the right than it has ever been.
So, Tristan, Europeans vote for their representatives in the EU, and French voters came out this time for the far right, which was a pretty big surprise, right?
Sure.
Maybe walk us through what happened.
Big surprise, yes and no. I think everyone was kind of expecting something of a swing to the far right, but maybe just not quite this much. So what happened was, so you have this European body, right? It's the European Parliament. MEPs, members of the European Parliament, sit in Strasbourg and in Brussels, and they make European laws. And every 5 years, there's an election, and people pay little or no attention to it sometimes because it's, MEPs do not have a kind of daily impact on people's lives. But it has been getting more important over recent years, mostly because the far right has become a stronger and stronger force within the European Parliament. And what happened was, in France, the far right did very well, led by a young guy called Jordan Bardella, who's 28 years old. He's a kind of political wonder kid. And he is the sort of acolyte, the number two, if you like, of Marine Le Pen, who is a much more familiar name to people. He is a kid from an immigrant background, and he grew up in a Paris banlieue. There's a kind of deprived suburb area, housing project area outside of the city. So he is the kind of complete opposite in many ways of what you would expect a traditional far-right leader to be in the National Front in France, or the National Rally as they're now called.
I've heard him referred to as Le TikTok King.
Yeah, he's huge on social media.
Our fellow citizens have expressed tonight their desire for change, but also a path for the future. This clear message, addressed to Emmanuel Macron and to European leaders, marks the determination of our country to see the European Union change its direction, to go towards more democracy, more protection, more consideration for the people of Europe.
He's well turned out. He's smart without being a brainiac like Macron. He's a great communicator, and young people love him. And what happened on that night was kind of crazy because the results came in.
Provisional results show Europe's centrist groups maintained their majority, but far-right parties made substantial gains, thanks in large part to Italy, Germany, and France.
Emmanuel Macron's party had done very badly, got less than half the vote of the far right. And all of a sudden we heard that Emmanuel Macron was going to address the nation. And then sure enough, he comes out, he makes a speech, and he dissolves parliament.
This decision is serious, a hard one, but it is above all an act of confidence. Confidence in you, my fellow citizens, in the capacity of the French people to make the fairest choice for themselves and for future generations.
And everyone was absolutely flabbergasted because it seemed at that moment to be a kind of shooting yourself in the foot kind of a move, because his party had just been absolutely spanked at the polls, and it looked like he was asking for another spanking.
Wow. So Macron dissolves parliament, calls for snap elections. When are those supposed to be held?
So the first round is on Sunday, the 30th of June, and the second round is on Sunday, the 7th of July. So by the time the Olympics start in late July, there could be a far-right Prime Minister, Jordan Bardella, in power.
Help me understand, why would Macron do this?
Well, as one pollster we spoke to said, he has a 10% chance of it being one of the most daring political moves ever attempted that will go down in history and be taught in political science schools. But he said there's a 90% chance it's going to fail completely and the far right will take power. So there are a number of theories about what he might have been trying to do. The most credible is that he knew probably that in September his government was going to fall anyway, because he's kind of struggling to get his laws through. And his kind of control of parliament is disintegrating to such an extent that by September, he might have lost a vote of no confidence and been forced to call an election anyway. So this may be a case of him kind of turning a necessity into a virtue. By doing this, there are a number of other interpretations. One is that there is a sort of sense of inevitability about Marine Le Pen winning the election to be president in 2027. And there is a theory that maybe he's trying to put the far right in power to make them own the situation in France right now, so that when 2027 comes around, they are not the kind of gleaming alternative. They are people who are already in power, who are not the solution to everything. They're part of the problem. So, I mean, I don't know if he's that much of a kind of four-dimensional chess player or not. I mean, the other theory is that French voters will do what they usually do, which is to rally behind the idea of the Republic, which means never allowing the far right into power. But if that was his calculation, it doesn't look like that's what's going to happen, because all the polls are suggesting that the far right are heading for a victory. Now, they may not win an outright majority, but they probably will be the largest party, so may have a very good chance of forming a government.
My goodness. So this is a real gamble that he's making. I mean, this is very, very risky, and it could be a big disaster for him and maybe for the country. But maybe we could back up just a little bit and give me some context, Tristan, as to why is this happening? Why has the right wing become so popular in France?
Well, I mean, a number of reasons. I mean, one of them is that Emmanuel Macron is hugely unpopular in certain sectors of society. He's seen as kind of arrogant and aloof, and the far right are seen as a kind of anti-establishment force. So there's been a kind of growing tinderbox for several years now. I mean, you might remember the Yellow Vest protests about 5 or 6 years ago, which were very strongly against Emmanuel Macron.
Police have again been firing tear gas and water cannon as Yellow Vest protesters ignited fires and ransacked shops. They're angry with French President Emmanuel Macron and his policies.
And that feeling of anger at the incumbent ruling class is very present.
Protesters accuse him of forgetting about ordinary people and instead favoring France's elites.
And so it's a sort of a populist movement like we've seen in many other countries. But there is also, a very strong concern about immigration in France, as there is in many other European countries. And the far right has always been seen to be strong on the issue of immigration. They want to institute something called national preference, and they want to strengthen borders. We've heard that in many other countries. National preference is a system by which you would not be able to benefit from social security and many other rights unless you were a French passport holder. And so that would exclude a whole bunch of people in France, many of them North African immigrants or immigrants from sub-Saharan Africa who live here and work here but don't have French nationality. Now, in order to institute that policy, it's illegal, right, under the Constitution. So they would have to change the Constitution. They would probably have to have a referendum to do so. And it would be hugely controversial. And if they try and bring this in, I think we can expect street demonstrations, a huge amount of social unrest, and a lot of very unhappy people. That said, the National Front from the far right in France is not the party it once was. Like, it has its roots as a kind of anti-Semitic party obsessed with keeping foreigners out of France, obsessed with France's history in Algeria and the Second World War and the Vichy government of the Second World War. All these things which a lot of young people today don't really care about, but they've transformed themselves. They've instituted this process of what Marine Le Pen calls undeviling, de-diabolisation. And that means to basically make the party more palatable to French voters who previously would never have considered electing a far-right government.
We are ready to exercise power if the French trust us during these future legislative elections. We are ready to rebuild the country, ready to defend the interests of the French, ready to put an end to mass immigration.
After the break, what do these elections mean for France and the EU? So, Tristan, a lot of change is happening on the right. You said the party's trying to make it more palatable. They brought in sort of this young blood. But, at one point, Macron was pretty popular as a president. What happened to his popularity?
I mean, it's tricky. He came to power on a kind of huge euphoric wave in 2017, but he's steadily seen an erosion of his popularity. And he's got to a point now where a lot of people in this country hate him, quite viscerally hate him. I think he is seen mostly as an aloof product of the elite. I think one of the things which has annoyed people in France are some of the things he says off the cuff when he's out and about meeting French voters. And he famously said to an unemployed person a few years ago who was complaining about the fact he couldn't find a job, he said, "There are loads of jobs in France. All you have to do is cross the street and you will find a job." And that has really stuck with people. And people feel that the promises he made when he was elected in 2017 have not been fulfilled.
And now in terms of this snap election that he's called for, one of the key things is he's not actually up for re-election, right? I mean, he only has 3 years left on his second term.
That's right. Yeah, the next election is 2027 and he cannot stand again. And this is one of the great problems with Macron is that he has failed to groom a successor and he has presided over a kind of one-man party. So there is no structure really around him. There is just him. So when he goes, what's left? Someone may yet emerge, but it does look like Marine Le Pen is the very strong favorite to win in 2027.
Tristan, what are the implications for France if Marine Le Pen wins? And for the EU?
It feels to me like that there is a very strong chance of strong social unrest for a period after she's elected, because there will be a large portion of society who are revolted by the prospect of a far-right government. So you could see big demonstrations in the street that could go on for quite a long time, police violence, those kinds of things we've seen before. What are the implications for people of immigrant origins in France are potentially quite serious. I mean, many Muslim voters, for example, especially young people, particularly feel that they do not have their place in France anymore.
A sharp increase in discrimination against French Muslims is seeing an exodus of highly qualified Muslim professionals. A new study by the University of Lille revealed that highly educated Muslims are leaving France in large numbers.
And there is a phenomenon of young Muslim French people leaving this country and going and seeking jobs elsewhere in the United States, elsewhere in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa. We could see more and more of that. The implications for the European Union are huge because France and Germany have traditionally been the motors of the European Union. And Marine Le Pen, although she's rolled back her desire to withdraw France from the European Union, is nonetheless not very friendly to the European project. So having a European Union where one of the main actors within it, France, is not that sold on the purpose of the European Union, we could see a process of dismantling of the EU from the inside. And she has made it very clear that she is keen to ally herself with traditionally Eurosceptic European leaders, people like Viktor Orban, for example. So it could have a cataclysmic effect on the future of the European project.
Right-wing politicians would like to see France leave the Schengen zone. And, we've heard of Brexit being tossed around. Explain to me what that means.
Well, Frexit would be like Brexit, which the UK has been engaged in for the last 8 years. The UK withdrew from the European Union. It's the only nation ever to have done that. And France is not likely to do that under Marine Le Pen, or at least we don't think so. So she was always keen for France to withdraw from the European Union, but she has rolled back on that policy. I'm not sure that's necessarily on the cards right now. I don't think there is the public support for that within France. But she would dismantle some very important tenets of the European Union. One of them is what's called the Schengen Zone. Now, the Schengen Zone is a border-free area within the EU and a couple of non-EU countries as well, like Norway, for example. And that basically means that you don't need a passport to go from France to Germany or Germany to Belgium, because these are all Schengen countries. Now, the far right in France want to reintroduce strong borders. So there would be a European border, and then there would be a French border. So they would reinstitute border checks between Germany and France, for example, or Italy and France. Now, that's rolling back a huge part of what the European Union is supposed to be about.
Huge implications then for the EU. And as it prepares for this election, French society appears to be in quite a bit of turmoil. You've been covering Paris for a long time now. Does this time compare to anything that you've seen before?
I mean, this has been brewing for a while, but when Macron announced the dissolution of the National Assembly and called this snap election, it felt to me a little bit like someone had dropped some vinegar into a bowl of oil. The vitriol and anger and sense of certainly political parties tearing themselves apart over what's happening. I mean, I've never seen French society as polarized as it is now.
Well, Tristan, thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by David Enders and Duha Mosaad, with Amy Walters, Chloe K. Lee, Mohammed Zain Shafi Khan, Manahil Naveed, and me, Natasha Del Toro, in for Malika Bilal. It was edited by Noor Wazwaz. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.